I'm delighted to welcome David Ingram, who's one of the ideal people to host at Network Capital. He's written a book, he's made several career transitions, and he's trying to build his category of one, doing things that he truly cares about. David, welcome to our platform. How are you doing today?
I'm well. Thanks very much for having me at Karsh. I'm really excited to be here.
So tell us a bit about yourself. I understand that you were an academic, and then suddenly something went, you decided to go on a different way. What happened?
Exactly, yeah. So I've made various changes of direction in my career, and those involve changing university, changing subject of study, um, applying to companies, being turned down, and then applying again and getting in the second time. So that's certainly been my experience. Is that originally I had some sort of a plan. I think I've been writing programs since age 7, so I knew from very early on that I wanted to work with computing. But exactly how that panned out was not something I could have anticipated. Um, so when I was at Cambridge, I was already combining kind of technical and people skills together.
Hmm.
So I was a research associate. I was also a director of studies, and I was in charge of the science admissions for the science subjects for one of the colleges there. Um, and that was a lot of fun. So I got to do organize computer science summer schools for young people. I taught Royal Institution masterclasses on robot programming. I had organized treasure hunts on open days. So I really enjoyed that. But in terms of the research, I gradually felt that I wanted to do something that would put products into the hands of real users sooner rather than later. So fundamental research is very important, but for me, I wanted that shorter feedback loop of being able to make a change and then getting feedback from the people who are using the thing that I'd built. And I really enjoy building things. So that's really what motivates that transition from academia into industry.
And you also studied in Cambridge. How was Cambridge for you? The overall experience, was it memorable as it is for many people?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was a really fantastic experience. I say originally I was at a different university, and I decided I'd rather be at Cambridge. And this is one of those kind of changes of direction that I executed. That was actually possible because there was no process for doing it. So it's not
Hmm.
something that anyone had written down. Here's how you do it, because no one had ever asked. So therefore, I asked, and it turned out it was possible. Also changing subjects. So I originally started out studying mathematics, which I'm absolutely fascinated by, but I'm not that good at. Really, computing is my strength. So I started off with that, and somehow I managed to get funding for a postgraduate degree in computing. I think because I was on the spot. I went and spoke to the admissions people. And they could see my face, and they said, "All right, we'll make a bet on you. We'll give you a place." And it paid off because I actually got the highest recorded mark ever in that computing course. So, so
Wow.
hopefully, they made the right decision.
And they clearly did. And your when you started in industry, was it hard? Because Cambridge is a bubble in and of itself, and industry functions at a different pace, different
Mhm,
expectations. The
mhm.
culture is different.
So my first real industrial role was actually AT&T Labs, and that was quite an easy transition to make because I was really operating on that interface between academia and industry. So I was still supervising students whilst I was working at AT&T. Um, and I've always been able to, thus far, pick companies that I really felt made a difference. So they're doing something that brings value to people, and that also made the transition a lot easier. So at AT&T, we had all kinds of crazy gadgets where I was working on augmented reality using this is before mobile phones, right? So I was using a PDA, and we had an ultrasonic positioning system to tell us where we were in space, so I could look around and use X-ray vision with my PDA. We had a thing we called the broadband phone. Again, this predates mobile phones, but we had a telephone with a screen on it. And
Hmm.
if this thing had gone to market, which unfortunately it didn't, it would have solved the problem of voice menus that we still have today, where we have to press 3 for customer service and 4 for something else. Because the idea was it would, along with a voice call, it would bring those little menus onto a screen right next to your phone that you could just press a button. And then one thing that I really took from that experience at AT&T that's made it all the way through into my book is a culture around giving demos.
Hmm.
I find in tech in general, people need a lot of preparation to demonstrate their work, and days of setup and so forth. Whereas at AT&T, we had a culture that you had to be ready to demo at 30 minutes notice at any time. And this was because we would often have visitors come be shown around the building, and they just turn up, and we like to sort of show them all the projects they're working on. And this I think was really great because it meant that you have to you can't break your systems; they have to be always in a permanent state of readiness, and that prevents you from diverging too far away from a working system on a release you're working on. So it's always something that you can show to people.
That's fantastic. And with this experience under your belt, I believe you also worked at Google and Meta. What was that like?
So that was very exciting. Obviously, great places to work. You get to work with some very smart people, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. But looking back on that period in my career, I would say actually that's the period where I learned the least. And the reason
Oh,
is really that you're obviously you're supported by a huge team. You're in a vast engineering department. So you're not pushed as much as when you're in, say, a startup where you have to wear many hats, and really take responsibility for a big piece of the product. So yeah, that was my personal experience. In I actually um, really enjoyed my time there, but I got more out of working with the startups, which I went on to do more later.
so for Google and Meta, being an engineer there or being in product there is considered prestigious. Many people find it a learning experience, but many people also say that they find sometimes the ability to make a personal impact fairly limited, or sometimes the growth plateaus. Do you think that happens because there are too many people working on the problem, or you're working on a very small part of the problem, or the fact that it's something else altogether?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a problem of scale, and different companies resist that to different degrees. So Google managed to keep its culture for a long time. I think Meta even longer, and still be able to move fast and be agile. But there comes a certain point where that's hard to do, and a lot of what I do these days is around ensuring that we have small, high-performing teams that don't have too many dependencies on others, and therefore they can achieve their goals independently, without the communications overhead and all of the other layers of bureaucracy that you get if you scale up in the wrong way.
Understood. So, what was the startup experiences like, which you did after Meta and Facebook, Meta and Google?
Really cool. So a formative experience for me was working for a company called Mendeley, which listeners will be familiar with if they've done some research, because it's a very commonly used system for keeping track of references when you write academic articles, research in the industry, PhD students. And I was drawn to this because, again, it's kind of bridging those worlds between theory and practice, right? Academia and industry. And how I actually joined was rather interesting because I applied for a different role from the one I actually got. So I applied for a Android engineer position because that's what I knew. So that was my comfort zone. But luckily, as it turned out, the VP sort of saw some potential in me, obviously, and it turned out that by the time I was interviewed, they'd already given the job to somebody else, but they didn't tell me that. So put me through the process anyway, and said, well, how about you do this instead? And I was a bit reluctant at first, but I ended up. So I did a little bit of work with the Android team. Then I went onto their platform team, building their backend, and I ended up being essentially the team lead because nobody else was doing it. So
Hmm.
there was a need for somebody to coordinate this. And the previous lead had moved on to other projects, so I just started doing this, and I think I was running the platform team for about a year before my job title actually changed to reflect reality. Um, yeah. And I was very lucky because I inherited a high performing team in this case. So
Hmm.
the previous manager had done a fantastic job, and it was a really strong team. So I was able to sustain that and build upon that, which is a lot easier than turning around a team that isn't working well. Later on, I kind of got those skills, but to begin with, I had this easy introduction. We managed to scale up the team very successfully whilst keeping the culture right without diluting it. We got to the point where we could hire another engineer. We were hiring another engineer every 2 weeks, sustainably, including all the onboarding and integrating them into the rest of the team.
What were you doing at this company called Sector Alarm? That's not really a startup. It's a mature
No.
company, high revenues. What drew you to them, and how did you define your role?
So Sector Alarm is a very large European home security company, and I worked with them more recently when I was now already being a consultant. So I'd moved from essentially I'd started to see patterns emerge, right? So
Mm.
lots of the companies I'd worked with had the same kinds of problems, and I was starting to feel, well, hang on, this is something we can do something about. The same growing pains, if you will, as you go from being a startup. Um, in Sector Alarm's case, they were an established company, but they were relatively new to doing all of their tech in house. So same situation, right? You need to grow the engineering organization, um, and yeah, I know why this happens, right? So if you're a startup, you've got to move fast, otherwise you will sink. You won't be successful. So in order to find that product market fit, and be a company at all, and to be in this situation of needing my help, you've got to have moved very quickly, possibly built up some technical debt, and made some rather hasty decisions. It's just part of the process. And the other problem is that at the company level, you've got a board to advise. But when it comes to technology, it's usually just one person who is being relied upon. There aren't really any advisors, and a startup is not going to be able to, have a full-time experienced VP Eng. So this is why I think there's a sort of need for somebody to come in and say, like, I've seen this before. Here's what we can do about this and make your technology better. And Sector Alarm has a really strong culture of hiring the best people and then empowering them,
Mm.
which was fantastic. I got to do all kinds of unexpected things there. We were, as part of team building activities, we were building Lego models in a ski resort where I took the entire department for 3 days in the mountains in Norway. I got to do interior design because we needed to change the way we used our offices now that we were working remotely or
Hmm.
hybrid working. And the previous offices were just not suited to that. And there were just rows of empty desks, which weren't being used. So we recognized that now the advantage of the office space was as a collaboration space, and that many of the developers are working at home when they were doing their individual programming. And therefore, we needed a completely different kind of office. And I think some companies have been struggling with this and not really knowing what to do with their old offices, maybe kind of getting rid of them to save costs. But I said, "No, hang on, let's reinvent the office. Let's make one that's suitable for the new way we're going to
Mm.
use it." And Central Alarm were brilliant. They were saying, "Sounds good to me. Do it." And so we did it in a couple of offices, one in Oslo and one in Malaga in Spain.
You chose to be a consultant at this company that you seem to have had a wonderful experience at. Why? Because you made this a foundational sort of pillar of your career at this stage. You choose to be, or you chose to be a consultant rather than a full-time person. Why?
That's right. Yeah. So um, I felt that I could have more impact by going to a company and giving them the benefit of the experience I've got, um, in a period of say 6 months, rather than um, taking permanent roles where you know what happens. You've been at a company for a few years. Your calendar's quite full now. There's lots of recurring meetings. Everybody knows you, um, and you have to do a bit more admin. So for me, I really like being able to kind of um, get into the problems without a lot of that kind of overhead involved.
That's so important, and I'm seeing this among exceptionally skilled people, researchers. People are choosing to have a portfolio of careers, sometimes just choosing to prioritize their learning over more traditional forms of employment. And that allows for some flexibility, but one needs to adjust as well. You recently published a book that I enjoyed reading very much, even though I don't identify, as just a product manager or an engineer, even though I've studied engineering and I use a lot of my foundation as an engineer to make decisions. I found it very interesting. What prompted you to write the book, and what was the process of putting, I would say, 200, 300 pages on this subject like?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned learning actually, because I believe we're always learning, and we have to be, especially in technology. So that is something that I gain from advising companies is I get to give back, but I also get to learn new things. And with the book, I felt this was a point where there was enough knowledge behind it that I should put it down and say, here are some best practices. Here are some answers to some of the common problems, and take a look at this, and maybe it will help your company too.
So for me, because I've met you once, I've read the book, I've heard a bit about you. I found that the transition, the patterns that you talked about in your work experience, they've been put down very well. So, what are some of these patterns that you want to highlight for product managers or engineers working on complex teams? Maybe you want to split your answers because it may not be the same for both.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, starting from the title, so I called the book "Building High Performing Teams," um, and there's two parts. There's the teams, and there's the high performing. So, um, teams are super important, right? And coming from a very traditional academic background, I didn't feel that people were necessarily being that well prepared for teamwork. And I've certainly, worked with people who are absolute geniuses, but not very good at the collaboration aspect. And you can get a lot of value from them, but eventually you're going to kind of end up with some siloed information that they're not sharing with other people, and it's going to be difficult to make progress on larger projects. And I've been fascinated by teamwork from a very long time. So I remember when I was a kid and I was playing role playing games, I was always the person who would try and get the group of players to work together to solve problems, right?
Hmm.
Which is not, by the way you should play role playing games. You should play the role, and that may involve acting out disagreements or your own personality. But I was very focused on I want everybody to get along and work together on a common goal. And also, I guess I feel frustration with sometimes larger groups being harder to coordinate. So imagine if um, you're visiting a new city and you want to organize a tour, then if you do it with 100 people, it's going to be a lot harder than with 10, because of getting everybody to agree on what the activities are going to be and the coordination overhead. And we have to wait for somebody whose bus is delayed. So this got me already thinking about the overhead of communications, small high performing teams, and removing those dependencies between the teams. So it's always something I've cared about in terms of the teamwork. And then high performing, there's two reasons why you might want this. I mean, it sounds obvious. Of course, you want a high performing team, but maybe not. It's expensive, hard to find the people. Why should I care about this? And the first reason is that software development doesn't parallelize all that well. So you can only split the application you want to build into so many different pieces. So even if I gave you like 100 more programmers, you can't necessarily deliver the thing you
Hmm.
want to build any faster, because you just can't subdivide it anymore and say, here, you do this piece, you do that piece.
Yeah.
So if you can only have a certain team size before it becomes essentially a separate application, then you want each of your team members to be as good as possible. And then the second reason is that high performing teams, they're not just faster developers, right? As well as they may be more productive, sure, but also, in addition to building the thing, a high performing team is going to think ahead to, will this thing scale to the future requirements? Will it be reliable? Will it be secure? So all of these non-functional requirements they're going to build in to what they're doing, and then that's going to save you a lot of time in the long run. So that's the sort of second reason why I wanted to really focus on high performing teams and make that the goal.
And you mentioned something so foundational. You can't throw money at the problem. You can't throw people at the problem.
Right.
Somewhere along the way, you have to actually go and fix the issue, and a lot of it has to do with building a team, getting the systems right. And this engineer product manager balance, which I feel forms the crux of your book, is is particularly revealing. What have you found to be common traits about low performing teams? Like, what are some of the common mistakes that they do, and how do high performing teams sort of address that at a very high level? I'm sure people will find more details in the book.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, first of all, low performing teams doesn't necessarily mean low performing individuals. So we're really talking about, is the team functioning here?
Mm,
Um, and there's various kind of different failure modes. So they may be producing a lot of stuff, but it's not the right stuff. So this is where you don't have the product function working well in terms of understanding the needs of their users. So we want to make sure that we are working on the correct things, first of all.
right.
And that's absolutely fundamental. And I always work with product managers because I think this is just so important. Engineers absolutely need to be aware of it as well, but you need to have people that are speaking with the users and understanding their needs. Then when you've got you know what you need to build, the question is, well, how do we organize ourselves so we can do this efficiently? And you this is where the communication overheads come into play, also the working with a legacy software and systems that weren't perhaps created in the ideal way to begin with. So invariably what happens is I have to take not just a low performing team, but a fairly challenging architectural setup where the software hasn't been designed or thought out that well to begin with.
Mm,
And I really like to divide and conquer. So you don't want to start kind of like a massive 2-year long project to kind of rewrite it all. That's not going to go well for you. Instead, you want to take individual pieces and improve them as you go, and you've got to work hand in hand with the technology and the team. So I like to say that at a certain point, all tech problems become people problems, right?
yeah.
Um, so it's absolutely down to the team, and if the team is working well, then you can just lead them to it, right? And they will do the right thing, and they don't require any kind of management really. So yeah, looking at both of those problems, the tech problems, and also how we organize as a team, and usually the biggest failure mode is going to be around dependencies. So
Mm,
um, let's say we write some software really fast, but it takes 3 weeks to release it because we have to send it to another team for legal approval, and another team for security analysis, and another team to deploy it to staging, and then our QAs are a bit busy and they take some time to go and test it. And so it's about speeding up those feedback loops, and that's so important because um, you get feedback about your changes sooner. You get to hear whether they were good changes and we should carry on in that direction. You also have less stuff in progress. So if you can release a change quickly, then you don't have to sort of say, well, this is ready to go, but it's not, it can't go out yet. I'll have to pick something else up, and you end up with juggling all these balls, and I can't keep lots of different things in my brain. So I certainly don't want to do that. So having the ability to release software quickly means that you've got the faster feedback, and you've don't have as much work in progress, and therefore you will be more efficient because you're not context switching all the time.
context switching can be a huge energy and creativity creep.
Yeah, yeah, that's for sure. I mean, we all can multitask to a certain extent, but there's some activities you just can't do that. And
Mm,
every time you pick something back up again, you don't quite realize how much time you're wasting just kind of relearning it, and
mm.
going, okay, where was I, what was I doing, let me go and look at the code again, let me remember why I was even doing this, what notes have I got. So having good notes helps, right? But there's always a certain overhead in it. So if you can get something finished, the point that is now out there, and then you can just forget about it, that's much better.
Yeah. You know, what fascinates me and surprises me about you, David, is that you're a techie at heart. You love building product systems. You've studied that. You've built a career on that. But it seems to me that you find your energy with the people side of the problem, and you observe quite a bit of that. And this is not common, because I know some engineers who prefer to code, or some product people who just like to focus on that. So, was there a particular moment in your time? Was there a particular shift that happened? Or was it very simply that you realized that to build tech, I need to address people, and that requires, a certain kind of mindset, and I'd focus there. I want to get into your head, like to figure out where are you taking your career? Because you could go in a few directions now.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think a lot of good things come when you combine two different disciplines, right, or two different sets of skills. So um, as you say, that combination of having some idea how the techno works and have some idea how the people work is going to be rarer than either one, and more valuable as a result. It probably took me quite a while to realize this was important, though, because I think when you're working on your own problem, you don't see the need for the teamwork as much. Um, it's still, I mean, some of the things we've talked about are still valid, right? Because even yourself, if you go back and look at something you did a year ago, you've forgotten your past self is now your collaborator, right? You have to collaborate with
Yeah,
your past self. Did they leave the right notes? Did they do a handover to future me? But yeah, it took a while for me to realize that this was so important. And yeah, now that's a lot of what I focus on.
fantastic. So, what kind of feedback have you gotten on the book? What's the most helpful, sort of heartwarming, and what's the most piercing feedback that you've got so far?
The feedback has been really helpful, and I actually had a different person work with me on each of the 12 chapters, and they're all experts, and they gave me great feedback and improved it a lot. Um, so I work a lot with a agile coach called Kim Leonard, and she pointed out I didn't have anything on continuous improvement
Hmm.
in the book, so that was a whole piece that was added because of her feedback. I was also told that, okay, in the learning and development which I'm really excited about, I present a huge array, a smorgasbord of different ways that you can upskill and continuously learn. But there was no advice on which of these do you pick, right? And you can't do them all. It would take too long and be too expensive. So I added a whole bunch of material on if you're in this situation, I would recommend using these methods to upskill your team. If you're in this situation, I would recommend this instead. So there was some great feedback like that. In terms of most kind of helpful negative feedback, I think originally I had an introduction, which was your typical kind of preface to the book that everybody skips over, including myself. And also inside it, there was a really important nugget of information that people absolutely had to read. So my fantastic proofreader James Ashwin spotted this and said, David, you got to separate these two things. People are going to skip over an important point here. So, and the other point was I guess a theme that runs through quite a lot of the book around complexity. So I wanted to lead with this and say you need to simplify everything you do. So my own company is called Simplified Systems, and I named it that because I think this is just so important. So I've seen, especially working places like Google and Meta, I've seen very smart people build really complex systems and make them work. But I think that the very smartest people, they will make the system simple.
Yeah.
And that's the hardest thing to do, but it really pays off because if you look at all the different problems that occur when you're developing, especially software products, where something might not scale, it might be unreliable and so forth. In my mind, the one that always gets you in the end, the real killer, is complexity if you haven't addressed it. So your software just gets so elaborate that you just don't dare touch it anymore. And any change you make will break three other things. That's why I really focus on complexity as a core issue. The other one is, personally for me, a lesson I had to learn was about MVPs, so minimum viable products.
Hmm.
Um, and this was a hard learned lesson. Originally, I love designing things. So when I was a kid, I was constantly designing apps, games, systems. Probably designed thousands of these things. But of course, I could only implement a few of them. And a lot of the projects I started, I was thinking, well, this is too complex and take too long to build. And then later learned you've got to absolutely pare down to the minimum possible thing that you can produce and then show to people and see if there's traction there. So that's why I talk about MVPs in the book. And I usually have so many ideas that for me I open the floodgates and get them all down. I don't try and limit creativity to begin with. It's a bit like
Hmm.
brainstorming process. And then I say, what's the MVP of this? And I throw out a bunch of stuff. I say, that's version 2, that's version 3. What's version 1? And then usually I have to do it again on that to make the true MVP. So because like, oh, but I really love this feature. No, is it necessary? No, it goes. And then I have a small thing that I can implement quickly and test out. So that was sorry, a bit of a digression, but that was that key concept that was hidden away in the introduction, and we pulled it into a separate prologue.
I feel that editing is the most challenging and most rewarding part of writing a book, defining how to visualize what you
Right.
have to say from the point of view of the reader. Um, just towards the very end, I want to check on learning. How should people think about learning in a space where everything's getting automated, things are changing particularly fast? And do you have any thoughts on organizational learning? Because the same challenge is magnified multiple times over when it comes to organizations.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, we've seen several transitions in. Originally you would read manuals, right, and learn from them, and then you got to the point where you're just firing off questions online and looking up the responses, and so you're organizing your learning instead of about I want to read the book cover to cover to I want to achieve this goal, and along the way I'm going to need some knowledge and some advice, and so I'm going to use that as the driver for my learning. I'm going to reach out when I need the help, and that's a lot more effective because if you have a mission in mind, then you know what you need to learn, because we're swimming in a sea of information, right? You can't know
Mm,
everything, so that really focuses your learning on what are the most important things to learn. um, and now, of course, we've got AI derived content, which is going to further complicate things. So that there'll be another
right.
shift to come with that, which is going to be very interesting. And then for organizations, I think that organizations can learn in different ways. So one of the obviously hiring is one way. So they bring in somebody with a different point of view. And one of the reasons I like to be an interim VP is that I can help upskill, level up the organization, and help them learn. And I encourage the organizations I work with to do the same. With if they need a specialist, if they need a specialist in AI, then get a specialist in AI. Right, it's going to be quicker than learning themselves. Um, so um, yeah, you have that process of gaining new knowledge via new talent, but then I think you need to decide what is the company's core values. And so I talk about that a bit in the book as well. So my favorite 4 values, which is just my personal choices, are technical excellence, which relates to high performing, support each other, which relates to teamwork, simplify, of course, move fast, which is a common value. For example, Facebook and Google both have very similar values, and have fun, because maybe not the most common value, but at the end of the day, what you're doing is about the journey as well as the destination, right? So you'll spend a lot of time working on these things. It better be something you enjoy. So I would say, the company, as they learn who they are and what their mission is, will build their own values, and the challenge really in terms of internalizing that knowledge in the company, in terms of all the people who constitute the company, is making sure that people actually live by those values, and it's not just a poster stuck on the wall somewhere that no one cares about, right? So that's how I see kind of knowledge and the ways this is how we do things being built into organizations via choosing their values and making them stick.
That sounds fantastic. David, is there anything I should have asked you that I didn't, or any parting words that you have? I'm obviously going to put the link of the book and your other material on the website.
No, that was fantastic. I think we covered a lot. So yeah, nothing to add really.
Keep being awesome. It was such a pleasure meeting you and finally having you on our pod. Thank you for doing what you do, and we can't wait to have you back for a deeper dive soon.
Thanks so much.
If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe to Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. we'll apprise you of the next episode and make you part of our community. Thank you very much.